Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, July 8th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about new polls out of the state of Ohio. Polls that claim that the Democratic nominee for Senate, Tim Ryan, is up by 9 points and 12 points, depending on the group that you are looking at. Now, I will first start out by saying that these numbers really come as a shock. They come as a shock because the state of Ohio is a red state at this point, voted for President Trump by 8 percentage points, and honestly speaking, I don't at all expect it to go to the Democratic Party. And looking at these numbers, it really doesn't change much of my opinion. Now, the Democratic Party has been propping up a lot of these new numbers, largely in response to this disengagement from the electorate for the state of Ohio. People aren't really focused on the Ohio election. People know that it is practically said and done for, as it was established when Donald Trump won the state by 8 points in an election where nearly every other state swung to the left by a more significant margin. Ohio was one of the states that swung by the least amounts. In fact, probably ranges in the top 5 when it comes down to states that moved the least between 2016 and 2020. The expectations for the state of Ohio at this point, well, in 2020, the Democrats didn't really expect to win Ohio, but they certainly didn't expect to lose it by the margin that they did. To remind you, the margin here was about 8.1%. The 2020 election forecast, even on 538, said that Ohio was a toss-up, that Trump won in 55% of outcomes, which did end up being correct. But what was wrong, and definitely off based off of polls alone, was the popular vote expectation and the popular vote margin. 49.8% to 49.2%, that's a margin and difference of about 1 point. The actual margin, again, was 8 percentage points. So when you see something off by that much, you automatically assume, okay, Ohio has a polling error in favor of the Republican Party, or at least the error ultimately ends up showing the Republican Party in a worse position in the polls than they actually perform, and that also the state itself really isn't this shifted swing state as it once was in 2012 or 2008 or even 2004. Looking at the state of Ohio for 2022, I still very much expect Tim Ryan to lose to J.D. Vance in this race. So what is this poll telling us? Well, I would first say that it really is more of a testament, I think, to name recognition rather than electability. Tim Ryan being at 49%, I don't know if I necessarily buy that, largely because, again, this is still a Trump state. And the national environment isn't where it was back in 2018 when Sherrod Brown was leading in the polls against Jim Renacci, or I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's not Renacci, I know that for a fact. Maybe, I don't know how to pronounce it correctly. I've been corrected 3 times now on my channel since I've even covered this race back in 2018, so someone please correct me. I'm just going to talk about the Republican nominee to avoid being rude about pronouncing a name incorrectly. But the point is that the Democrat Sherrod Brown in 2018 only ended up winning the election by 6.4%. And the Republican here wasn't exactly the strongest Republican possible. Josh Mandel's name might ring a bell because he ran for Senate in 2022, lost the primary to J.D. Vance. Now, he was actually the Republican nominee for Senate back in 2012 in the race against Sherrod Brown. He lost the race by about 6 points and then ran again in 2018 to challenge Sherrod Brown. Then issues came about with his wife and his family, and now they are since separated. But back then, it was an intermarriage. I guess they were married at the time, and they were going through the process of separation. So ultimately, Josh Mandel decided that he was going to withdraw himself from the race. The race became a lot more solid for the Democratic Party, but the final margin here ended up being 6.4%. This is why I don't buy the number here that is telling us that Tim Ryan is ahead by 9 or 12 points. I honestly don't even buy the numbers that say that Tim Ryan is ahead whatsoever. Looking at polls from Ohio in 2020 or even 2016, what we find is that typically they underestimate the Republican Party. Presidential election, Senate election, governor election, no matter which way you cross it, Ohio typically underestimates Republicans. But even by the margin they were off in 2016 for Trump and Hillary or Clinton, you look at 2020 and you see it was off by even more. Even if you shift the new poll from Center Street PAC and SurveyMonkey, what you find is that Tim Ryan still comes out ahead. I think these polls are just simply off. I don't like to argue with data, but I can't find real justification for this. We know Ohio is going to be red. I know Democrats would so badly like this race to be competitive, but reasonably thinking, Ohio is going red. Think about exactly where we were back in 2020 looking at the polls that said that Joe Biden was within 1 point of defeating Donald Trump within this state. At one point, Joe Biden maintained a 3-point lead across the state of Ohio. Just a month later from this 3-point lead, lost by 8.2%. The fact remains Ohio was competitive in 2020, but it ultimately swung heavily in favor of Donald Trump on Election Day. But it's something that the polls consistently missed. Because for the better portion of the months leading into the general election campaign finalizing into November, Donald Trump didn't even have a lead in a state that he won by a super significant margin, at least for a swing state. Which raises the question, is Ohio really a swing state? I would argue it's not going to be this swing race as Democrats would like in 2022. Now, I could be entirely wrong. I'm not doubting that. I have been wrong before, and I will admit it every single time. But I just simply don't think I'm wrong about the state of Ohio. J.D. Vance, according to FiveThirtyEight, has an 83% chance of victory. I don't think FiveThirtyEight is accurate 100% of the time because, like myself, like other political pundits, and like many other forecasting websites, it isn't accurate 100% of the time. But it is accurate to an extent. And it does recognize and does show when the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are lacking in their respective races. Looking at the forecast here, these new polls did narrowly move it closer. It went from a 90% chance of victory for Republicans down to 83. Sure, FiveThirtyEight is recognizing some of these polls, but they're not saying that it's enough to entirely sway the margin. When you look at the polls-only forecast, that's when you really see it. The polls-only forecast says that Tim Ryan wins the race following these numbers. Again, I would not trust this much into polls. Do I think Tim Ryan is a good candidate and J.D. Vance a bad candidate? Absolutely. I 100% buy that. But this isn't his election year. If Democrats struggled to get a 6-point victory in 2018 in a year with a popular incumbent in a year beneficial towards them and other factors benefiting them, I honestly can't see how we could even expect the Democrats to win the Senate race in Ohio in 2022. The reason why we don't just blindly trust the polls is because when Tim Ryan is the favorite in Ohio, it raises the Democratic Party's chances at winning control of the Senate to 61%. That just simply is unrealistic. Looking at Ohio, Tim Ryan is not the favorite to win. Even the classic model recognizes that J.D. Vance has a 2-3 shot at victory. Now, until these experts change their ratings, I stand by my characterization that Ohio is going to be likely red. We were off in 2020 when we said that Joe Biden would come close in Ohio, or lose it by a tilt margin. He lost it by 8 points. I didn't have a channel back in 2016, but pundits were wrong when they once said Ohio was going blue on that front, and polls did suggest at one point that it was going to be blue, or was going to be a very narrow Trump state. Again, that was wrong. 2016 was one of the most egregious polling errors and mistakes for companies that we had seen in modern U.S. politics. 2012, you go back to that election, look at the numbers, nearly spot on. You go back to 2008, take a look at the polling numbers, nearly spot on. You go back to 2004, you take a look at the polling numbers, nearly spot on. The results in these races were accurately predicted by polls leading into 2016. But the question was not necessarily, is it just inaccurate one time, but more so what went wrong? Is it going to be inaccurate in the future? And that answer was yes. And a lot of people can blame it on President Trump, but unlike other states, sometimes these polls weren't super accurate. If you average the last 4 polls in the Ohio Senate race, you get a double-digit victory for Sherrod Brown. That's not exactly something that can be super comparable to his 6.4% victory. Yes, the outcome and the eventual winner was correct, but you're talking about overestimating the Democrats by 5-6 points. Some of these polls overestimated Brown by 11 points. Looking at the Ohio Senate race in 2012, I actually don't want to talk much about that one because it is interesting. Because prior to 2016, the polls were correct. I don't think it was a Sherrod Brown thing that I was wrong in 2018 because I was actually going to bring up my next point, the Ohio governor's race, where in the last 4 polls leading into the governor regular election, the Democrats led in 3 out of the 4 polls, and there was a tie in the other. Yet ultimately, Mike DeWine won by 4.3%. This also shows that even in a blue wave, Ohio was unwilling to vote Dem. They might have voted blue in 2018 on the Senate level, but not on the governor level. And that's where it gets tricky for Democrats this election cycle. So what I see in Ohio, what I expect to see with Tim Ryan, is a loss. As unfortunate as it sounds for the Democratic Party, I can't justify expecting this to be a true and honest margin. 9-12 doesn't make sense. There's a polling error here. There is something wrong. And Democrats shouldn't have false hope in a seat that is practically unwinnable at this point in time. Doesn't mean they shouldn't invest, because down ballot races matter a lot. Tim Ryan is a good candidate. When I say unwinnable, I don't mean it's not worth fighting for. But what I do mean is that the race itself is not something Democrats should count on for the majority or rely on to expand the majority whatsoever. And despite polling errors and polling discrepancies that might suggest that Tim Ryan is ahead, again, nobody realistically expects him to win this Senate race. When taking a look at the predictions and any other source of information beyond just a few obscure polls, you find that lean, likely, and solid Republican have dominated the ratings for the state of Ohio for practically the entirety of this midterm election season. So, what we should expect for Ohio is that, yes, I think Tim Ryan, if he is able to narrow it up, sure, that will be somewhat of a moral victory for the Democratic Party, but that's the most that I see happening. Tim Ryan, I think, should be setting the goal not necessarily to win the Senate race. Obviously, it's a done deal in terms of a GOP victory, but there are down ballot races that would really benefit tremendously by Tim Ryan performing well on the top of the ticket and driving up turnout for a race that probably is being written off by national Democrats as we speak. And while that might make sense financially speaking and fundraising speaking and whatever it might be, Tim Ryan actually raising a significant portion of money, more than any other Senate candidate in Ohio history, we also do realize that the electability of Tim Ryan is there. The midterm environment just simply isn't conducive for that electability to actually be usable and effective for the midterm elections. But as I was saying, what Tim Ryan's goal should be, not necessarily to realistically believe that he has a chance at victory, but more so at a shot at expanding Democratic turnout, at narrowing up the race down narrower than where it was back in 2020. If Tim Ryan can make the Ohio Senate race closer than the 2020 presidential election, I think, one, it will show that J.D. Vance is vulnerable in the future, that he individually, as a Republican contender, isn't exactly this extremely strong Republican nominee, and that's been pretty established through the campaigns that we've seen him run. But on top of that, that the Democratic Party still has some reasonable fighting chance in Ohio. Democrats lost Ohio twice because President Trump absolutely decimated both Clinton and Biden on the general election ballot, but there is still a fighting chance for Democrats, and even 2018 proved that. 2024 is going to be a year where you see numerous Senate elections coming up, and the Democratic Party is going to see a lot of states targeted. Immediately off the bat, you know the GOP is going to go on the offense in Montana, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Virginia. I mean, you're talking 11 states at a minimum where the Democratic Party is going to be vulnerable in. In addition to that, Republicans are going to be defending territory in states where they have incumbents, meaning they are going to benefit while still being competitive states. Yes, they are going to be close, but they are going to benefit from their incumbency status in Texas and Florida. But the 2024 map, Democrats really need anything that they can get. And if in 2022 they are able to take a race that seems to be completely against them, according to expert forecasts, and make it narrower than what was the margin of victory for Donald Trump in 2020, it tells you that Democrats with the right candidates and with the wrong GOP nominee, and it happens more often than you think, especially in the state of Ohio, that the wrong GOP nominee is nominated, what you find is that depending on the candidates, depending on the circumstance, Ohio could very well go blue in the future. But of course, that relies on this election performance. It relies on the data and what actually happens in the state of Ohio. Of course, Sherrod Brown could still win in 2024 should the margin not be as close as it was in 2020, should J.D. Vance win by 10, 15 points, because 2 years prior to Sherrod Brown's victory in Ohio, Donald Trump swung the state by over 10 points, and then also Rob Portman won the Senate election by over 20 points. So it's not a perfect and flawless indicator, but since we are now working within an open seat, it does give us a bit of a better estimation as to when you remove incumbents, when you remove states or candidates that have been known for years now across these states, and you just put forward a Democrat and Republican nominee, how does Ohio vote? If it narrows up in a red wave year, such as 2022, the Democratic Party should see that as a moral victory. Obviously, moral victories do not translate into any actual victories in that election, but they are good predictors, and they are good ways to gauge an electorate. Democrats saw moral victories in their special elections in 2017 and 2018. The only election the Democrats actually ended up flipping leading into the midterm elections was in Conor Lamb's seat in Pennsylvania's 18th congressional district. You saw it happen with the Republicans in Texas's 34th district with Mayra Flores. She ended up winning her race, and that was a very early warning sign that, hey, the House is going to the GOP, and it is going to be a red wave year. You see this happen all the time, but Republicans also had many moral victories as well. They narrowed up some races that weren't as narrow before, or maybe they were able to take states that Republicans narrowly won before and expanded on those margins. You saw it happen even in Texas and in other races where Republicans may not necessarily have been the most viable options. Now, all around, what I think we should see from Ohio is just to take a look at this margin. Tim Ryan is going to lose. J.D. Vance is going to win, at least as it stands currently, and I don't see much changing that. The state of Ohio might have some polls that are telling us that the race is going to be close, but realistically, we can't trust them. We can't rely on them, and we can't count on them to give us an accurate depiction as to where the race is right now, just because we know, truly speaking, that they are off so much. Now, if more data comes out from the state of Ohio telling us that the race is going to go to Tim Ryan or it's going to be closer, then yes, my analysis and my expectations for Ohio will change pretty dramatically. But for right now, I don't really trust this most recent poll. I don't think that it makes sense to put Tim Ryan ahead, and practically everyone else is agreeing with me on that point. The polls can be wrong. They've been wrong in Ohio before, and I think this time they are continuing to be wrong. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.